Hi, my name is Sujata. I'm from India. And in this series of videos, I hope to discuss with you about how to find our best selves through the path of individuation as proposed by Carl Gustav Jung, the father of psychology. And just before we get started, I want to say that I'm not a trained psychologist or anybody with a therapist with a degree or anything. So if you're looking for proper formal psychological help or in information that is informed by formal degrees, etc., this is not the right place. But if you are interested in discussing this topic as a learner, as a seeker, then you're welcome to listen and contribute and leave your comments. I would love to hear your perspectives, and I think we can learn from each other. So, with that out of the way, let's talk about self growth, self development. I think the human journey in the times that we are alive is essentially one where we seek, or we should seek, to be our best selves so that we can find a way to positively contribute and leave behind some sort of a positive contribution, however small, however impactful, behind in the world as our legacy of our time on this planet. So, if we must move towards being our best selves, we have to start with knowing ourselves. And then we must also identify what that best looks like and also know how to go from who we have become to who we must endeavor to be. And that path of going from our current self to our best self is what Carl Jung calls individuation, the process of individuation. It is liberating ourselves of limiting beliefs. It is liberating ourselves of repressed emotions and finding a way to live balanced lives and to have equilibrium around emotions and to be accepting of humanity. So if this topic interests you, please stay on. And if you are a parent, if you have a loved one, or even if you are just trying to come out of your own questions about who you are and who you can be, if you are seeking to live your true potential, I would urge you to stay on and stick with this conversation. So, what is the self? The self in the world of Jung is a three-part construct. The ego, which is who we express ourselves to be very naturally in an everyday way, and which people also acknowledge. The people who see us acknowledge us as, and so that's your expressed ego. Then there is the persona, which is your mask, the mask that we wear and take off based on circumstances. And then there is the shadow. The shadow is deeply embedded ideas in the subconscious that we haven't quite processed, but which are still very much within us and which come out in strange and unpredictable ways, and which are very much a part of who we are, but we don't necessarily recognize them. So the process of individuation is to be authentic, is to be confident about our ego, to be authentic about our persona, and recognizing and integrating the shadow. So what is this ego anyway? The ego is our self-concept. It is what we are most confident about. It is who we take ourselves to be, who others acknowledge that we are. So typically we resort to tropes. When I say tropes, it is common culturally understood ideas that everybody in the collective understands. Ideas such as mother, father, lover, warrior, king. King is like a father, but never mind. Joker, wanderer, peacemaker. And there are several like this. Jung identifies 12. I think there are more like 16, but that's a conversation for another day. Nevertheless, these are roles that you would see, characters that you would say see in a movie or in a drama that you readily identify with, never mind which culture you're from. And Jung called these archetypes. Why archetypes? Archaic stereotypes. Archaic because they've been passed on through the generations. These are ancient ideas that have come through the generations and we accept collectively. And we accept collectively as standard patterns or types. Therefore, archaic stereotypes, archetypes. And we'll talk more about archetypes in later videos in detail. But more commonly, rather than calling them by the Jungian archetypal terms, we probably think of ourselves as, I am a nice person, I am a peacemaker, I am a rule follower, I'm strong, I'm unrelenting, I am lovely, I am funny, I am chill, I am cool, and so on and so forth, or I'm serious. So these are our self-concept, our self-image of ourselves, which we are very comfortable owning, and which is what most people recognize us by. So again, that is the ego. Again, keep in mind, the word ego has nothing to do with egoism or egoticism, and it's not a bad thing. It's just who you are in your everyday conversations. And then comes the persona. The persona is a mask that you wear temporarily. Now, the important thing about a persona is that you're aware that you're wearing it and you're taking it off. And you use it very opportunistically. You know that the circumstance needs this mask, right? So, for example, we typically have personas at work or within family gathering on Thanksgiving or at a Diwali gathering or whatever, where, for example, with your friends, you might be partying, right? And you might be having a whale of a time and you're probably just a partying person naturally, right? But in a family context, in a joint family context, or at a family gathering, you might be a very serious, sedate, and very polite, and a person who's serving all the time. But that is not the real you. And you're okay to acknowledge it. That's important. You're okay to acknowledge that, hey, I am this party girl, but in front of relatives, I am this very sedate person. And you're okay to have those conflicting ideas of yours to be acknowledged by people who are close to you. And it is very transactional. It is on, and the circumstance is gone, it's off. In another circumstance, say at work, you wear a different mask, and then once that work situation is over, you take it off. So personas are, one, acknowledged by you, recognized by you, and two, they're temporary. So ego done, persona done. The third is shadow. Now a shadow is also not your ego, but then neither is it your persona, because a shadow is probably something you don't even recognize that you have. But others do. The others do see. And this is the kind of thing where you will sometimes see this broad consensus opinion about you by others who are from very different backgrounds, and people seem to converge on this idea about you that you find quite puzzling, really. So, for example, either as a jest, in a joking way, or in a sarcastic way, or sometimes even in a strong way, you might be told something like, "My goodness, you are such a know-it-all." And somewhere you're like, I've heard that before. Why does everybody call me a know-it-all? And you have a hard time accepting it. Because in your mind, you see, you are informed. You are meticulous about being thorough. You are intelligent. You think before you speak. How did that become a know-it-all? But well, everybody says so. And that is often a marker of a shadow. As a shadow is something that others can often see in you, but for you it is in your blind spot. So you can't very readily see. And that's part of the problem with integrating your shadow into your ego. Because you can't even see it. What are you going to integrate, right? But there are other markers of shadow. You can identify your shadow as in various ways. And we will talk about that in a bit. But what is the shadow anyway? It is everything that the ego opposes. Okay, so just going back to this idea that you are a nice person, right? The ego says you're this nice person, you're very agreeable, and that's what you want people to believe you as, and everybody thinks of you that way. Which means that when somebody is being not very nice to you, you're not able to just tell them off, because that's not you. Neither are you able to talk about that person behind their back and be a little bitchy about it. You can't do that either, because then you're not a nice person in your own eyes, right? In your own eyes, you're unable to come out of this trap of your ego identity and do anything different. Even though somewhere, if you're truly authentic, it's not like you like everybody. There are people you don't like, but it is so difficult to come out and say that, because then you risk being seen as not nice by yourself and, of course, by others as well. This is the trap of the shadow. And what happens is that the shadow doesn't just sit there. The shadow is a pain. When you're very upset, what happens, or under great stress, the shadow surfaces in very negative ways. So there are 2-3 ways that the shadow acts out. One is, like I said, in a very negative form, it comes out and it censures and it condemns sharply anybody who is not a very nice person. Even when they're being very reasonably assertive, you double bind them into words of in ways that make them feel very ashamed of who they are. They were just standing up for themselves. But no, you have to point it out as you're being a mean person who is so bad. You couldn't be nice, you couldn't be polite, you had to say this way, and now I'm all hurt. And so basically now the other person is bound to fulfilling a role of being a very nice person, when being a nice person was probably not even the best way to deal with that situation. Why? Because you can't deal with because in condoning their assertive action, somewhere you're telling yourself that you owe it to yourself to be assertive too. But you simply don't have the courage to come out and be assertive. The ego is the easy path out. The ego is the path where I'm this nice person. Now you have to risk rejection, and you have to go against your grain to come out and say, no, I don't like what you did. What you did was a very bad thing. And that person may never like you for the rest of your life. And that rejection is something that you have to be okay with, for you to come out and say, no, I don't like you. And you don't want to take that risk, because the shadow wants to say it, but the ego suppresses it. And because you're dealing with this conflict within you, when you see somebody else deal with all of it with aplomb, you don't really like them, because they are showing you a mirror of what you can and probably should be, and you don't want to accept it. And somewhere within you, you so want to be that person. I wish I could have told him off like that. But you can't. Rather, you won't. Right? So that is what the shadow does. The second thing is the shadow creates judgment. Like I said, it creates this need to censure others. It creates this need to put down others. And I want to take a moment to differentiate between shadow and value system. Because I do hear people say that, oh, but that's my value system. Am I just supposed to sit around and take everything? What I believe in, I'm going to stand up for that. But that's hand waving. That is a kind of cop-out that we indulge in to protect our ego, rather than deal with the shadow. And why is it a cop-out? Because I'll tell you, the difference between, and there is a very clear litmus test of what is value system and what is a shadow. The value system will essentially guide your behavior, but you will be okay with someone else doing it differently. Because the nature of value system is that your value system is yours. But when you acknowledge that another person is a different human being, they have the right to their own value system, and yours doesn't apply. So you're okay with them being the way they are, even loved ones, even your own spouse, your child, your parent, whoever. You're okay with them taking their own decisions based on their value system, but you will hold your own, and that's okay. That's value system. The shadow is where the censuring begins, and that's where the judgment and the nasty adjectives come in. In a shadow, you feel the need to suppress another person's difference from your ego, a person who is different from your ego identity, because you feel challenged. And now you feel insecure. You must protect your ego. Your ego feels fragile and you must protect it. And therefore, the way you take it is to crush them, calling them names. So, for example, if somebody is being assertive, you will call them a jerk, you will call them rude, you will call them a bore, you will call them insensitive, bad person. Not a bad action, mind you, a bad person, no less. Poorly brought up, ill-mannered, social disgrace, anything passes. When the shadow boxing, when you're fighting from behind the shadow, you can say anything you want and you think you're getting away with it. But really, you are just fighting yourself, those voices within you that want to be free. And you don't want to let that happen because it's just too much work. Shadow work is very hard, very hard. So the point is that the process of individuation is that you must acknowledge that the shadow exists by looking at what people tell you. And you don't have to listen to everything that people tell you, of course, that's not always valid. But when there is a consensus opinion that you find a little difficult to accept, don't accept it, but consider it as a possibility for exploration, for your own inner exploration. The other marker is things that you are livid and judgmental about and you feel embarrassed by when somebody does, when your loved one does, when your child does something and you feel embarrassed by it or you feel disgusted by it. That's probably shadow. And when you call people names, you can be fairly sure that that's your shadow because that's not a rational place. Name calling does not come from a steady, rational place. When you're at equilibrium, you will not call someone names. So the question for you then is, here is an exercise I will leave you with. Maybe try writing down the things that really trigger you when either you do it or somebody you love does it. Keep in mind that what people do who are not relevant to you it doesn't count here. It is people who your ego and your identity is tied up with, typically your children or your spouse or somebody like that. And what are those behaviors that really trigger you and push your buttons? And are they a matter of value system or are they a matter of shadow? And I told you how to differentiate the two. If you're okay to let them be, that's value system. If you're not okay to let them be, time to look inwards. And the third marker for a shadow is sometimes you yourself would want to be that, at least sometimes, and you feel trapped. So I'll leave you with that exercise of writing down the things that trigger you, the emotions that trigger you, or the behaviors that trigger you, and your own ego identity. What are the words that you would use to describe yourself and your best qualities? And we will meet again in the next video where we will talk about how the different archetypes clash and why we absolutely need to work on our shadows to be successful people in society in a more holistic way. See you in the next video and thank you for listening.